The sight is as staggering as it is devastating. A transmission tower in Avondale snapping in Hurricane Ida's winds. The twisted wreckage afterwards. The power lines, lifelines to the entire metro New Orleans area dunked into the Mississippi River. New Orleans City Council President Helena Murrow put the scene in perspective.
What I find unfortunate is that so often it takes something like this for changes to be made.
Entergy Louisiana CEO Philip May said the 400-foot tower that fell was robustly engineered and had just been inspected, but simply could not take the power of Ida.
Those towers, all of those towers, went through Hurricane Katrina without wavering. But this wind event experienced much higher wind fields, much more devastating wind to those structures and to our system than even Katrina.
But the catastrophic transmission failure Entergy says it experienced is more than this one tower and more than the corridor it's a part of, which feeds electricity from a larger regional power grid through this point at Avondale on the West Bank and onto the East Bank of Jefferson Parish at Harahan. May said all 8 transmission corridors that transmit power from the outside world into Metro New Orleans all failed. That leaves the entire area from St. Charles Parish in the west to the Twin Spans in the east and down the coast through St. Bernard and Plaquemines isolated with no power. Entergy even calls it an island. But May says Entergy cannot commit to a timeline. Moreno expects it could take several weeks.
I just want to be very honest with the people of New Orleans. I got off the phone with the Entergy engineers earlier today, and they told me that the assessment alone of the transmission failures, that alone could take up to 4 days. So up to 4 days of just assessing the damage before it could be repaired.
After the assessment, Entergy crews and contractors will work along 2 tracks, trying to get one of the 7 remaining transmission lines back up and running, or generating power from within the island itself, using the power station at 9 Mile Point, or by firing up the new power plant at Michoud in New Orleans East.
Also, can we get a line coming in from 9 Mile, one of the lines fixed here, and then potentially get 9 Mile powering New Orleans along with the New Orleans power station in New Orleans East? That would provide us over 600 megawatts of power in the city of New Orleans, our own little off-the-grid self-power generation to keep us afloat. This won't make us perfect.
600 megawatts is enough for essentially emergency services and things like that, critical services, not necessarily to power everybody's house.
You got it.
The New Orleans City Council regulates Entergy, allowing it to charge customers for the costs of a new power plant in New Orleans East and for hardening its towers and utility poles. May said that's been money well spent.
Every time we build a new line, it's built to a higher standard. It's using different engineered structures, things that would be able to withstand, 150-mile-an-hour winds, that kind of thing. More robust foundations and so forth, so they can't be pushed over by the wind. And that's really where the improvements in infrastructure have been taking place.
But the complete failure of the transmission system in Ida makes Moreno wonder.
But for all 8 to fail, I just think that I'm just wondering whether this could have been prevented, and that's what we're going to be looking into. So yes, the focus is on absolute restoration. That is what we're all about right now, but more will follow with investigations and getting to the bottom of how this happened and what can be done better by the company.
When the whole metro New Orleans area south of Lake Pontchartrain was cut off from the outside electric grid at 8 access points, the hope was a new power station in New Orleans East would save the day. The New Orleans power station did not deliver its own self-generated power, but it did play a key role in delivering power Wednesday morning. A high-voltage line from Slidell was restored overnight, and the power station acted as a switching station to ration out the power 10 megawatts at a time. The power station could handle a total of 128 megawatts, representing just 10% of the city's power needs, but that was big for Entergy New Orleans CEO Deanna Rodriguez.
This morning was a significant milestone.
More than 11,000 customers in New Orleans East and Mid-City got power back by late morning, including the New Orleans Fire Department and the VA hospital. But Entergy needs more power coming from the west to create a loop to various substations.
In terms of the restoration, the way that it's working is we are moving from the New Orleans East area towards 9 Mile.
The 9 Mile Point Power Station is located here on the West Bank across from uptown New Orleans. It can feed directly to the Sewerage and Water Board power plant in Carrollton. It normally feeds power across another river crossing to Harahan, but that won't be possible because Hurricane Ida knocked the tower there into a twisted heap.
So we're trying to make a loop. We're going west around the city, and it will go from substation to substation. So we're not picking neighborhoods, we're following the flow of electricity, and the electricity has to go safely from substation to substation. There are 10 substations that are ready to serve customers.
But the challenge is to feed substations outside the city of New Orleans, too. Entergy told surrounding parishes they would get power also, which was a relief to St. Bernard Parish President Guy McGinnis.
Entergy is not interested in getting somebody on before someone else. They want to get everybody on. We need to know that. They're working hard to get your electricity on.
The key to that will be getting one of the 7 high-voltage transmission lines working from the west. That may involve bringing power from the Waterford nuclear station. The timing of that is still unclear.
So we're not quite done with the damage assessment, and as soon as we have that information, we'll be able to, and we will, inform the public.
David Hammer, Eyewitness News. We have continued to press Entergy to explain the catastrophic transmission failure it experienced in Hurricane Ida when the storm knocked out all 8 high-voltage lines carrying electricity into the New Orleans area. Here's my exchange with Entergy Louisiana CEO Philip May during a conference call Thursday morning.
Could you go down the list of what those failures were on those 8 corridors coming in?
I can get that for you, David. I can tell you generally what it is. We had trees on lines, oftentimes trees outside of a right-of-way blown into the transmission system. We had additional debris on line. We had towers that failed just from wind fields and so forth.
The chairman of the elected state board that regulates Entergy outside the city of New Orleans wants to know more, too.
The money that they'd set aside for transmission monitoring upgrades that they said they were going to allocate to that, did they and how?
Louisiana Public Service Commission Chairman Dr. Craig Green sent this letter to President Joe Biden asking him to dedicate federal money to strengthen Entergy's grid.
But what does the most resilient transmission grid look like, and how much will it cost? Is the perfect storm that it knocked out all 8? I can't tell you more until we look into it as to why.
Entergy reports spending $4.2 billion since 2014 on expanding its transmission system. May says newly built or restored towers and wires, as well as strengthened substations where electricity is converted for distribution to homes and businesses, are engineered to withstand 150-mile-per-hour winds. The highest gusts measured by the National Weather Service in Dulac only reached 120 knots, or 138 miles per hour. And what about this major transmission tower in Avondale? It collapsed in winds nowhere close to that. Next door in Wagaman, the National Weather Service reported maximum winds of 80 knots, or 92 miles per hour. We found the tower the day after Ida riddled with rust. So why wasn't it upgraded?
Those are some of the questions we're going to ask. I know in Laura, the ones when they replaced the transmission structures, they were replaced with more modern, more sturdy, more wind-resistant ones. So the analysis will be, well, why wasn't that one?
We asked that very question to Entergy's May. He said the tower was inspected at the end of last year and didn't need any upgrades.
So like that tower was very robustly engineered. We're not going to go in and proactively replace a tower like that. I mean, that is an enormously expensive engineered structure.
Entergy's New Orleans subsidiary is regulated by the New Orleans City Council. Council President Helena Moreno said she wants to make sure customers are not stuck with a bill for equipment failures Entergy could have prevented.
I think that at times the company may think that their regulator should be an additional mouthpiece for them, but that is not our role. Our role is to watch out for the people of this city. And so that's what we on this council will continue to do.
Both Green and Murrow sent Entergy letters last week demanding more accountability, something both say they'll be demanding next year when the utility presents the bill for Hurricane Ida restoration. David Hammer, Eyewitness News. 17 Entergy customers sued the utility on Monday on behalf of all 900,000 customers who lost power in Hurricane Ida. One of the attorneys representing the customers is former state legislator Juan LaFonta.
I mean, it's laughable we've allowed this to go on this far and this long. I mean, they knew prior to this storm, the stuff that happened with the windstorm that came through a couple months ago, that they had challenges and they didn't make it public.
The lawsuit cites our reporting on the rusty transmission tower that collapsed in Avondale during Ida, quoting Entergy Louisiana CEO Philip May's interview with us the day after the storm.
So like that tower was very robustly engineered. We're not going to go in and proactively replace a tower like that.
The Louisiana Public Service Commission says it has no inspection reports for the tower, and Entergy has declined our repeated requests for a copy of the report May talked about. But it's not just that one tower. The lawsuit also alleges Entergy lied to regulators about the resiliency of its system before all 8 transmission lines feeding the New Orleans area failed in Ida.
How can we hold them accountable if they're clandestine in the stuff that they're holding, the information they're holding, they're not being transparent to the community?
City Council President Helena Moreno is calling for investigations of Entergy at the state and federal level.
There need to be significant reforms, in my opinion, with this corporation and how it operates. But look, we're just New Orleans. We are probably the smallest regulator dealing with the smallest piece of the Entergy Corporation, Entergy New Orleans.
The U.S. Justice Department's Antitrust Division called on Entergy to sell off its transmission lines to a third party in 2012, but Entergy never did it.
Once again, I hope that I'm wrong, but I feel like the company is just way too focused on their profits and not on the very best for their ratepayers, and that they're too focused on investing in building power plants because that's what makes the money, and not investing in hardening their transmission lines and allowing competition into their transmission because that doesn't make them money.
Moreno sent a letter Monday to the regional power grid operator MISO, asking it to use its influence to, quote, ensure that transmission solutions for the New Orleans area are adopted in 2022. LaFonta and others hope that pressure is mounting. David Hammer, Eyewitness News. The questions came after Hurricane Isaac in 2012.
I'm looking to see a report from the head of the major corporation as to how much investment has gone into infrastructure versus profit.
And they came again after Hurricane Ida this year.
Can you tell me how much money you've spent on upgrades and hardening of transmission systems versus just repairing them?
Why do Entergy's transmission lines keep failing in big storms? Large transmission lines carry high-voltage electricity across long distances, from power plants to substations, so it can be distributed on smaller lines and power poles to homes and businesses. All 8 of those transmission superhighways into the New Orleans area failed in Hurricane Ida. One main transmission tower even collapsed into a rusty heap. Entergy's critics say that's because the utility refuses to invest in maintaining and improving the transmission grid that connects to other regions and other utility companies.
But actually, what's damaging is them making a concerted effort to stop progress.
John Norris is the former chairman of the Iowa Public Service Commission and served on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. As a FERC commissioner in 2013, Norris voted to let Entergy join MISO, an organization that manages the transmission grid operated by different utilities in the Midwest. The Justice Department was investigating Entergy for preventing the kind of competition that could have lowered rates for customers. Joining MISO should have opened up more cheaper sources of energy from northern states tied in through an expanded electric grid. But Norris said that never happened.
And then since Entergy joined MISO, they have continued to obstruct, try and delay and stop regional planning so that regional lines don't get built.
Clean energy consultant Andy Kowalczyk told Entergy's regulators at the New Orleans City Council that Entergy treats the transmission grid like a used car.
We can't keep, spending money on one used car after another used car. We got to invest in long-term solutions.
What Entergy does invest in is generating its own electricity. Entergy Louisiana and Entergy New Orleans say they spent $2.7 billion adding 4 gas-fired power plants in 2019 and 2020 alone in Lake Charles, St. Charles Parish, Washington Parish, and New Orleans East. And federal government records show that over the last 5 years, Entergy Louisiana and Entergy New Orleans spent 4 times as much to generate their own power as they did to operate, maintain, and improve the transmission grid. Entergy then sells the power it generates for tens of millions of dollars in profits. Norris says that's out of whack compared to the major utility companies in MISO North.
It's indicative of Entergy's business model, which is to build generation and protect it from competition to maximize the return they can get on that generation investment.
Norris says the only way to change that is for government regulators at the City Council and Louisiana Public Service Commission to get tough with Entergy.
They've got to look behind the curtain. Entergy is masterful. And so regulators have got to recognize to not just take Entergy's word for anything, but actually verify and be open.
Otherwise, the questions after storms will keep sounding like a broken record. David Hammer, Eyewitness News. In the wake of a total blackout in the days after Hurricane Ida, the New Orleans City Council's Utility Committee voted unanimously Wednesday to launch investigations and audits of Entergy New Orleans, the monopoly power company they regulate. The council members challenged Entergy New Orleans CEO Deanna Rodriguez on a number of issues.
Can you tell me how much money you've spent on upgrades and hardening of transmission systems versus just repairing them?
No, I can't tell you that right now, and I assume that will be part of the investigative process. So
the committee voted to ask state and federal regulators to launch their own investigations of Entergy Louisiana's transmission lines, hoping to find out why a rusty transmission tower collapsed in Avondale, cutting off one of the 8 main transmission lines into the city.
And so many times when we see rusty old things, we feel like it's been abandoned.
That's right. That's right. And it could well work, right? But I think it's important for us to go through that investigative process and provide that information to you.
Entergy New Orleans Vice President Courtney Nicholson said Entergy looked into putting more of its lines underground and found it did not lead to more reliability.
Undergrounding isn't necessarily the silver bullet that it sort of intuitively seems like it would be.
But Councilwoman Kristen Palmer pushed back.
But I also think that we need to have, again, a third party to do this and not Entergy, because I do think that this is one of the solutions that we have to be looking for. If Entergy had buried one neighborhood a year since we've been requesting this, we would have had 10 additional neighborhoods that would have had underground lines. Because I don't buy y'all's answer on that, so thank you.
Rodriguez acknowledged communication failures, but she defended her company's overall performance, especially its use of a new $210 million power plant to get first light back to the city 2 days after the storm blew through.
This very small plant located in New Orleans East played a huge role in getting the power back on.
Jesse George from the Alliance for Affordable Energy testified that the plant actually failed because Entergy had promised it would black start if all outside power was lost.
A false promise. By Entergy's own admission, the plant could not safely fire up without restoration of transmission from Slidell, which took several days to accomplish.
The council committee also passed non-binding resolutions, including one asking Entergy not to implement new rates in November, even though the council already approved them and Entergy agreed to wait a year because of the pandemic. David Hammer, Eyewitness News.